So let's get started. So a few years back, I started doing more and more JavaScript development. Back then, it was called DHTML. Later, it was called Ajax, and now we call it HTML5. And back then, I was a .NET developer. I built web apps with ASP.NET, and I had first-class tooling, Visual Studio, SQL Management Studio. It was a good life. I started doing this JavaScript development, and I decided, wow, these JavaScript developers, freaking cavemen, you know? And what do I mean by that? They had literally no tooling or bare bones tooling. They hacked in a text editor. They refreshed their IE6 browser. And they prayed that something painted on the screen. It could take hours trying to find a missing semicolon or a comma. Most of you can probably relate. So use your tools. So I came to Sencha because I decided there's a better path. I learned that using Microsoft Tech. And I knew JavaScript was the future. And I came to build Architect. So super excited to talk to you guys today about Architect 3. But I did want to talk about some of the design principles we had when we first started building Architect. And the first and foremost was that we wanted to be able to generate beautiful code. And what that means is it should look exactly like a Sencha expert would write by hand. And that makes it more maintainable and non-buggy. So the second thing was instant feedback loop. Like I said earlier, typing in your text editor, refreshing the browser, that's painful. You should be able to try out new layouts, add buttons, change the text, configure your stores, and instantly know, like, it worked. It didn't work. I'm missing a comma. Auto upgrades were painful back then between framework versions. Upgrading now between XJS 4.1 and 4.2 is a tap of a button. Architect takes care of it for you. And then finally, basically allowing you, the developer, to get to writing the code that matters to you. The defining code for your product, the customer feature that you're asked for, building the business value, not boilerplate view code, configuring, writing 100 lines to configure your server or your server with your store. So let's talk about what we're going to do today in this session. We're going to build a dashboard app using XJS and Architect. And if you came to the previous session, Dave talked a little bit about how ping pong is very important to Sencha. Every office has ping pong tables. We even brought it to the conference. The community room, hopefully you get a chance to play. Don't play the guys in green shirts, because you might get hurt. We're serious. Anyways, we're going to talk about a fictitious ping pong store. It sells paddles and ping pong balls and tables. And it's really a heads-up display for executives to look at sales figures. We're going to start by talking about how do you get started building an Architect app. Do a little orientation for those who haven't used Architect before. We're going to add our data, add our views, add user interaction. So user clicks this, let's make something happen, right? Finally, we're going to do a little bit of styling, although theming will be covered with the session right after this. And there should be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And you can always grab me outside if we don't get to your question. So my name is Phil Strong. I'm a core engineer on the Architect team. And this is Steve Sobel. He's also a core engineer on the Architect team. We live, we breathe this stuff. We're going to be faster than you are. And I'm going to try to make sure we slow down and talk about the different features of Architect. So let's do it. Let's get started.
Yeah. So I'm Steve Sobel. I'm also an engineer on the Architect team with Phil. And I'm just going to kind of talk you through what Phil is doing. We're going to cheat a little bit. You'll see us tab over to a cheat sheet to paste some functions, because we really want you to see just how quickly an application can be built, but we don't want you to see us make a bunch of typos while we type a function we memorized. So we'll cheat a little bit, but you can build pretty fast. What you'll see here in about a half an hour, you could realistically do in a couple of hours. So without further ado.
Yeah, do you want to do a little orientation?
Yeah, so how many of you guys were in the talk just before this here with the Touch app that we built? OK, so a lot of people weren't, so that's good.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give a quick overview of just what you see on Architect. And so in Architect, you'll see the big empty space in the middle is the canvas, and that's where you'll see a preview of what it is you're building. And on our left side here, we've switched it from the default. The default, if you're familiar with Architect, is actually on the right. There's a setting you can change if you prefer it on the left. A lot of us internally do. So the section on the left here is your inspector. And so that is the tree of all of the elements in your project. On the right, you'll see our toolbox, and these are all the things that you can drag out. So all the standard components in the framework, those are in the toolbox. You can drag them out either onto the canvas, and you'll get a highlight if you want to make it a child of an element, or you can drag it over to the inspector. We'll also show you a couple of even faster and easier ways once you get really proficient with Architect to do that even quicker. So finally, at the bottom, whenever you drag out a component, you usually need to change its name. You need to set up a couple of configs. And so that happens in the config pane, and that's at the bottom right. So there's your kind of roadmap of what Architect is if you're not familiar. And without further ado, we'll start building.
Yeah. Just the last thing, code editor.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
So that's also in the center, and we'll show you a little bit of that. So we have a brand new application, and I'll start getting it going. So
as Phil gets started, if you missed the presentation just before this, the kind of story arc is we built a touch application that relates to this ping pong store for people out in the field. We are going to build the desktop applications for the pointy-headed bosses to look at. And so we already have a backend built up in Node.js and MongoDB that's already set up, and we're not going to bore you with those details. So you'll see Phil setting up our data models and our stores to talk to that. So this is an example of what that would return. Pretty simple stuff, just JSON data with a few fields standard, and you'll see how Phil gets that set up to accommodate those fields.
yeah,
So thus far, Phil has dragged out a JSON proxy, and we're going to do 3 of these. And what a JSON proxy is, if you're more familiar with XJS or Touch, JSON proxy in Architect is just a shortcut. It drags out your store as well as your, a JSON store. A JSON store is a shortcut to your store, your proxy, and your reader. So it drags all those out, it adds them as children, and you can configure them right away, because 99% of the time you need all 3.
yeah. So I'm being bad, and I'm starting with stores. Let's start with models. That's the problem.
Yes,
I was
that
like,
is
man,
true.
your script is
I was just
totally
going to let you
wrong.
run with it, but so
Awesome.
for those unfamiliar, the model is just going to define what fields we're going to accept in our data. It says what does a row in this kind of spreadsheet type data look like, right? So Phil is defining the fields here and defining a couple things. He's going to define the ID so that we can access this from other code. And shortly here, you'll see. So now we're going to add the fields. And a quick shortcut tip is you can type in a bunch of fields comma separated, so you don't have to keep clicking and adding, click, add, and type, click, add, and type. Phil's just going to paste in that comma separated list, and you'll see, bam, it just added all those fields.
Awesome.
Now, you'll see most of these are text, but in the case of the one that happens to be highlighted, because it's the last one that was added, that's balance. So Phil's going to want to change that type to be a float.
Not a Boolean.
Balance could be true or false, but we prefer to make money in our ping pong store, so we're going to make it a float.
Awesome. Do you want me to start, do a little cooking magic and drag out 2 more of our models?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
If you could do a quick add real quick.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
We
So
do fancy
Phil's going to do these saved components and just drag out a couple of models. So we pre-canned these for you just so that you don't have to watch us do the same thing 3 times. So Phil's going to drag each of these out, and you'll see it's already got all the fields and settings defined.
Yep.
You already saw Phil set 1 field to float. We don't need to show you that 12 times.
All right. So I'm betting we're going to go to adding stores.
Yeah, so now we're going to work on our stores. And so the model is what sets up what the fields look like. The store is where do I get that data and how do I store it in. So the store is going to be your list of all these records, and JSON, the JSON proxy. You might have done that so quick. It looked like you were configuring the URL.
I was waiting for you to.
The JSON
Yeah, I was.
proxy,
I'm showing one feature real quick is that
yeah.
I was on the proxy, and I'd already typed store in my config panel. And so I was like, I'm in the wrong place. So I could have locked it in the config filter. And now anywhere you click, it'll filter that instantly when you click it. But I also can do something, a shortcut. It's Apple E or Control E. And what that'll do is select the config so you can type something different. Or it'll go ahead and also filter what you'd had before. So.
Right. We're big on keyboard navigation and using the mouse as little as possible. So you'll hear us give a few of those tips.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so I'm not to the proxy yet. I'm still slow.
Yep. So Phil is still setting up our store real quick. You'll see he's going to associate it with the model. So this one is going to associate with the customer model.
Yes. And I saw when I did that when we dragged this out,
Oh, yeah, we gave it the wrong name. That's important. So
yeah.
that's fixed real fast.
All right. So proxy I set. All right.
Yeah.
So cooking
So
magic
now we
again.
can drag out 2 more of these stores. So essentially, same deal, right? We've got a store of data. We want to tell the proxy where it's going to pull the data from. So we have 2 more URLs that we didn't show you in that browser that pull order data and customer categories. And Phil can show you that real quick. So here's what orders look like. Pretty similar stuff.
Not going to show that one. OK, so we have stores. So now, because I'm more prone to typos than Steve, we're going to start building out this dashboard. And there's a lot to go on, so I'm going to try to keep up with you.
All right.
All right.